good.
Yeah, bad thing.
It was actually working a minute ago. Okay, doesn't matter. Now my keyboard is not working either. Alright. Okay. Good. Alright, so mainly we approach to this problem as a strategic use of invisibility. I really would like to talk about the background of this research a little bit so that I can introduce myself a little more to you, because one of the main reasons that I am here today is looking for collaboration opportunities, because when I check your website, I see many research articles that are very similar to my interests, and so I would like to give you a little background about what I care about, what I do in terms of research. So one of the keywords here is really invisibility, or in other words, privacy. I am a privacy and security researcher. Obviously, in today's age, we need to apply this concept to social media, and it was inevitable to study this not only on social media but enterprise social media as well. For various reasons, we decided to label it as openness, closeness, or visibility versus invisibility rather than privacy in the workplace, and I'm going to get to that as well. But today's research is really about this I space versus we space, basically the balance between private versus collaborative environments at the workplace. You would recall from probably the old movies, 70s, the workplaces were all about being so open. People are smoking, they work together. There was no concept of having your private cubicle at the time. Then things changed dramatically and we started having our own private places, but it ended up terminating as well, because managers realized that that's not the best way to be productive. So it's really about finding the balance of I space versus we space, and understanding in which situations we need the I versus we space to be productive, to be creative, or for different kinds of performance measures. So this is the main idea behind everything we have done. It's a big project. I have 3 major papers under review at the moment coming from this data set. I'll briefly talk about all of them, but a bit more about my background in terms of research. So mainly I study cybersecurity and privacy on different contexts, including social media, to be able to understand IT users' information privacy and security related perceptions, decision-making, behaviors, to identify their vulnerabilities to privacy and security invasions, as well as mainly to design them better systems to help them protect their own privacy or security. So the whole idea is providing them effective security or privacy policies, awareness or training programs, or easy to use technologies that would nudge them towards better behaviors. That's the main idea. So when you look at this topic from this perspective, it's all about studying the individual, right? You don't really think about groups as much, and I mainly utilize, as many other researchers, surveys, experiments, or other qualitative methods, adopting psychology or behavioral economics kind of theories. And the main idea behind it, as probably some of you know, is we have this privacy paradox that people say, I am concerned about my privacy without taking any action about it. And I think recently I saw something on your webpage saying resolving the privacy paradox. I know some of you are actually working on this particular topic. So in terms of behavior, it could be compliance with a policy or adopting a specific technology. Why do we adopt any technology in the presence of security or privacy concerns? So that's my main framework when I study this topic. Just a very quick example. to make it a little more clear is a paper that's under review by Journal of IS at the moment. So we all know the traditional auto-form filler tools, right? So they are opt-out tools, meaning when it's there on the web page, everything is filled out for you, and if you don't like it, you need to opt out intentionally to delete that piece of information. And this is filled out based on anything, any personal information you have provided to a previous web page on your computer. And obviously it comes with all kinds of advantages and benefits, such as reducing the effort and time required for filling out the online form. But is it really the best way to go with? Because we know that people actually mainly disclose more than they intended to when they are provided with this kind of tools. So we designed two alternative tools that could replace the traditional tool, which we call simply add type of tool or remove type of tool. Add type of tool is the opt-in tool with buttons, so everything is empty. If you like to provide any piece of information, you need to intentionally and specifically click on that button, versus the opt-out tool, which is not so much different than the traditional tool because everything is filled out for you. So it's an opt-out type of tool with buttons by which you could remove the personal information as you wish, right? And we provided a web page in which our participants would provide their personal information, and 3 other web pages that comes with the fill-in options. And we conducted a true online experiment, 2 experiments actually, but I'll jump to the findings right away. As expected, people were disclosing significantly more personal information when they use traditional auto-form filler tools. But the more important thing was contextual fit, which we defined as providing the right piece of, or the right fit piece of information to the web page. When it comes to contextual fit, they were doing a much better job when they were using add or remove alternative type of tools. So meaning, if I'm working on a health-related website, I'm comfortable providing my health-related information, okay? It's actually a very sensitive piece of data, but this contextual fit matters, and they were putting more processing time to think about what kind of information, what types of information is relevant to this website, so let me disclose that one. Or if it's work-related information, then providing work-related address or other kind of sensitive information was okay, but the others were not okay. So the contextual fit mattered a lot, which meant that participants were making more informed choices when it comes to disclosing personal information. And for subjective evaluations, people like the add type of tool a lot more than the others, which was also interesting because they were actually disclosing a lot, so they had to click so many buttons to do so, but the control that button provided them was appreciated, we believe. So this is still, we still have plans for this work. For example, providing some kind of framing or nudging clauses on the buttons saying in a positive or a negative way. For example, personalize this for me, keep it private for me. So you can go with all kinds of messages to nudge people towards different behaviors as well. So this is the individual kind of work, and I know some of you care about privacy and security. In the future, I would like to continue this type of research, looking at cybersecurity and privacy as a socio-technical challenge, particularly focusing on social media, of course, and focusing on the awareness, training, and education perspective, maybe by providing visualization techniques to present policy requirements. This is one of the topics that I'm really interested in, vulnerable populations such as teens or seniors, using social media with different cultural or socio-economical backgrounds. So this is about the individual work, and the interesting thing is in the literature, really there are pretty much no studies looking at this behavior from the group perspective, which is very interesting because most of the privacy or security related behavior is actually shaped within groups. The social norm is very important, what our friends are doing is very important. The culture of the particular IT platform we are utilizing could be very important. And not only that, sometimes the way people observe or view us, perceive us, could also change our behaviors, as in these two examples, right? So we know that we need to be looking at this problem not only from an individual perspective, but also from a group perspective as well. To be able to do that, I started a second research stream to understand how privacy or strategic use of invisibility at the workplace, meaning how the dissemination or restriction of information flow affects individual groups or organizations that rely on digital technologies. And all of a sudden it becomes a social media research, and we decided to label it as visibility and invisibility research rather than privacy. But at the end, our ultimate goal is to offer guidance in the effective use of enterprise social media to enhance participation, effective use, creativity, innovation. There are just so many dependent variables you could look at for this kind of research. And we basically use social media data and big data analytics for in terms of methodology. And we study groups for sure. So, and in this stream of research, I take visibility versus privacy as a spectrum, as a proxy for resource access, which in turn affects performance. So this is really the fundamental framework behind everything that I study or any kind of research question that I have. Is we being open or closed, meaning I versus we space that I have. How does it affect my access to valuable resources, not only information, but other things as well? And in return, my group performance, team performance, my organization's performance in different ways. And obviously this has been studied in different literature, such as knowledge management literature before enterprise social media. But back in the days, it was really about resource access. It was a resource access problem. Whether you know the right people to reach to ask for the correct information. Nowadays, it's more of a knowledge sharing platform because you are on this social domain, social media domain, and you have the whole capacity to make your piece of information private or open for different reasons. And how does it affect this whole thing? That's the question I have. For performance, we mainly care about creativity and innovation. The study that I'll explain in a minute is about participation, really, because we have a very complicated big data set, and we had to understand, first of all, how people use that particular piece of social media at the workplace. But other than that, we have studies going on creativity, generativity, etc., etc. At the firm level, you could also look at financial outcomes, project success outcomes, which are more difficult variables to reach for obvious reasons. Okay, so when it comes to this framework, simple conclusion is if something is private, invisible, then you cannot access to that resource, which is a bad thing, right? But in the workplace, we argue that it should be a lot more complicated than that. Because paradoxically, due to sometimes information overload, sometimes job security or confidentiality reason, sometimes being private could actually make things a lot more positive in the long run. As a team, for example, you might want to be hidden from the rest of the organization to have your creative space and to go with really crazy ideas for a while before you introduce the final outcome, right? Or sometimes, you know, if you receive so many emails, that becomes overwhelming and you don't want to read any of them. It's important to have the right type of email in your mailbox so that things are more effective. Any questions, by the way? Feel free to interrupt me to make it interactive anytime you like. Okay, so in this project, I'll talk about the participation patterns, but we have two other projects looking at the creativity aspect of the output. A little bit about the case that we have been working on. The company is called the Steelcase Corporation, located in Michigan, USA, which has over 11K employees in 80 locations and 40 countries. So it's a truly multinational, multicultural corporation that provides client office space solutions, including technology and furnishing. I'll show you a couple examples. And they very heavily use enterprise social media in the organization. And after long negotiations, they were willing to provide us with the system log data for all users. And the system has been launched in spring 2012, so we have access to 8 years of data at the moment. These figures are actually taken from a 2018 study, I think, so we have more users now. But about more than 10,000 users, more than 1,000 groups, and more than 500 projects we currently have in the system logs. And what they do, they have different divisions. So these are some of the projects that they do for healthcare, for example. It's all about making the workplace more effective, using different kinds of furniture and technology for them. Because they are a design company, they care so much about innovation and creativity as well. That's one of the primary reasons why they utilize enterprise social media at the workplace. And they were so proud of the ESM usage in the workplace because it's very, very actively used. They came to us, we came to them, it was a mutual thing, and they really wanted to know what else can we do. It's already being very heavily used, it's a very popular system, and the participation is completely voluntary. But are we doing it, are we using it in the right way or not? That was their question. So that's how we started the project. Some examples for education solutions, as you see, space innovation, or simply furniture, textile, or lighting. Whatever you can think of to make the workplace more effective or to promote employee well-being, all these things are interests of this company.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the system is? Maybe you're getting to that, but when you say enterprise social media, is it email, is it like Twitter, is it like Facebook?
It's not Facebook or anything. It's a private system called Spike that runs on the Gyro platform, designed specifically for the workplaces, but it looks very, very similar to Facebook. It's not Facebook, but it's not email either. People have their individual spaces, which they could make open or private, and they could be enrolled in any kind of group as a team or not as a team. It doesn't have to reflect their real work or the real work, organizational hierarchy at all. It's because the use is completely, voluntary. But they are involved in either open or closed groups as well. So it's pretty identical to Facebook kind of a place, I would say.
And then is it peripheral? Do they still have traditional email systems, and do they have Messenger?
They do,
or other things?
yes.
So it's an add-on.
It is an add-on. And although it's an add-on, it's very actively used. Yes. Yeah, thank you for these are good points to clarify at this point. So this is the Spark system, and the visibility affordance provided for individual, group, project, any piece of document that you upload on the system could be open or private. And they had 4 settings, but we mainly selected open and secret because these were the most extreme options. In the open one, membership is open, and non-members can view content and participate. So, I mean, if you're part of the group, you receive notifications, but even if you're not part of the group, you can view everything if it's on an open group, right? Versus in a closed or a secret group, membership is by invitation only, and only members can participate. The other members, users of the ESM doesn't even know the existence of that group, so it's completely secret. So we decided to go with the 2 extremes, either being completely open or completely secret, by which you're not even aware of the existence of the group on the social media. So as I said, in this very first project, we decided to look at the actual usage of ESM, because we all know that 4 out of 5 companies use it. Many of them think that they are doing the right thing, but are they really doing the right thing? And in what ways they are using that piece of social media? What are the participation models? What are the distinct usage behavior of these models? So these were the questions we had. So specifically we asked, on this particular platform, what are the different classes of users in ESM and their motivations to use the system? And plus, if they are contributing to any type of social media community, meaning groups available on the social platform, do these different user classes contribute to different types of ESM communities? In terms of the behavior, we look at posting behavior and viewing behavior, so contributing versus consumption. In terms of the communities, we look at whether the group is visible or private, and the size of the group as well, to know what kind of user classes with what kind of motivations contribute to what kind of communities. So this is our research question here. And obviously this participation thing is not a completely new thing. Traditional social media literature has already answered many of that before. We have this common model of participation that's validated in various online communities literature, saying that we usually have large mass of periphery users as opposed to small group of very active core contributors, usually referring to 80 to 20% of usage on any kind of public social media. And it comes with various benefits. For example, it facilitates knowledge management or knowledge sharing. So it's not a bad thing to have many users following a small group of core users, right? And our thinking in the beginning was ESM, yes, it's a different environment because it runs in an organization, but ESM should still reflect this core periphery structure due to its similarities with online communities and the benefits and the information sharing benefits, basically. But also, if you think about the organization, the workplace, people are there as employees, right? And their behavior, although it's voluntary to use the system, is always part of the general job performance, because they would like to build their reputation, enhance status, maybe establish self-image, or expand professional networks. And if you think about this particular company, it's a multinational, multicultural company. Especially if you're so peripheral geographically, you may want to connect with the people in Michigan in the headquarters, right? So you may want to be a little more visible on this platform. So we thought maybe there's a different group of users on this platform, which we call the promoters, displaying distinct preferences for contributing to different types of ESM communities. And in terms of community types, as I said, we look for large closed groups, small closed, as opposed to large open and small open groups. So we look at two main variables, which is group size and group visibility, right? And when it comes to preferences, in terms of hypothesis, we thought that because promoters would like to make themselves visible to the company and to the other employees, they would prefer open groups. Otherwise, in closed groups, they cannot be really too visible. But the others will care more about closed group connections and strong bonding. And in terms of methodology, we started with cluster analysis simply to see how things fit statistically to identify the classes of users. And then to understand the real motivations, we conducted several interviews and specifically asked them, why are you using this system? And finally, we went with an analytical model to see what kind of communities contribute to what kind of, what kind of users contribute to what kind of communities at the final stage. And in the first stage, we found that, as a result of the cluster analysis, we found that enterprise online communities actually reflect the core periphery structure similar to traditional online communities. So we have a small number of core users and a large number of periphery users, right? But interestingly, we found not only one, but actually two different classes of users, which could be labeled as promoters because they talk a lot more than they consume any content, which was a very, very interesting and shocking finding for us because the managers or facilitators of this social media at the workplace were so proud of the usage behavior of this platform, but we found that yes, it's being used, it's heavily used, but people are actually using this platform just to talk, not to listen. So these are just a bit more specific numbers. If you look at the ratio for core users, you'll see that they talk a lot, but they view a lot as well, which is the best thing. And they are really the leaders of the community, as opposed to periphery users. So they don't talk a lot, but they read a lot, they consume content a lot, which is also great. But when it comes to promoters, especially here what we call super promoters, because they actually talk more than 8 times that they read. So they are there just to post things and not to consume anything or not to listen to anyone. This is a bit less dramatic here, which we still call promoters, but it's 1 to 2.6 ratio, as you see.
What are the numbers here? What are the numbers? Is it minutes,
At
percentages?
the end?
38.19.
So the average number of posts that they read or post. Mm-hmm.
And that's over a specific time period?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and it wasn't 8 years. This is really an early on project, so I believe we had 4 years of data, or maybe even 3. So the numbers are not that big, but it was really the beginning of the social media usage. So so numbers are, I'm sure, dramatically more at the moment, but the ratios are probably the same. So in the second phase, we were really more interested in knowing why they do what they do. What are their motivations? So for the qualitative analysis, we interviewed them, we collected the data from a representative sample of 13 people, 13 employees, not only representative in terms of their location and positions, but also representative in terms of the user type. So we specifically went after periphery users, promoters. It wasn't very easy to find the super promoters, so because their number is very limited, but we still picked one of them. So it's a true, it's a representative sample of what we have in the online community population. Now, when it comes to core users, we found that they are there to share ideas and knowledge for open innovation and creating and coordinating projects for team success. They were mainly team leaders, and when we interviewed them, they actually talked quite a bit about the importance of allowing free flows of ideas and information, using ESM as a good opportunity for open innovation, specifically, referring to their group or their team. We have a blog, we have a new community to share our best practices, because we went through so many challenges, and we would like to share all the results with the other teams so that everyone can be successful. So they were really the leaders, facilitators of that social media platform. When it comes to periphery users, yes, they do read the news about the company to feel connected. Many of them actually were geographically isolated as well. So they felt the need to look up to people prior to meetings or prior to any kind of importance lounge, to be connected with the rest of the company, right? So a few quotes from periphery users. I am more open, I'm more often a consumer of social media than a contributor. I check the system every couple of days just because I feel like we are geographically isolated and the company is very headquarters centric, etc., etc. So their motivation was to be connected with the rest of the company. When it comes to super promoters who post frequently but read very rarely, they actually post for personal reputation building, attention, and connecting for personal reputation building as well. And they were actually very open about this. If you want to build your reputation, you could keep blogging about personal successes and maintain attention. Honestly speaking, I follow to keep up the appearances, but I don't actively read their content. So they are there just to be visible, which is understandable in the workplace, I guess. When it comes to promoters, though, which are also there for posting personal reputation building, but also we found as a result of our qualitative study is also for team reputation building, so representing their team or their project. People that normally don't even know us as a team or not familiar with us as a department can read our success story, have a better idea of what we do or our role in the workplace. I think that's a great way. So they are there not just for personal reputation building or branding, but also for their team success. So that was interesting to see this distinction, that the distinction is not only related, is not only about the numbers, statistics, but also conceptually there were differences between these two groups. So we actually, after this stage, we decided to label them as self-promoters as opposed to community promoters, rather than super promoters versus promoters, because there were some qualitative differences between the two groups as well. And when it comes to the communities that they prefer to be involved in, to be engaged in, super promoters significantly preferred small open groups. So we were definitely expecting them to prefer open groups, because otherwise how can you be visible to the rest of the company? But the interesting thing was the small part when it comes to group size. And we explained this as when it's a small group of people, you actually have very little to do with the competition, because you can be the only one talking, bragging about yourself, because it's a small group, but it's still open to the rest of the company. Anyone can actually follow the post there. But the people who are there just for writing, posting, is a small group of people. So they were mainly preferring small open groups. And core users significantly preferred large closed groups, which is also understandable, but kind of completely defeats the purpose, because core users, as you know, are the leaders, they are the facilitators, they would like to share the team experiences and help others, but if all this is happening, all this valuable information sharing is happening within a closed group space, it's really not good for the rest of the company. And they were there for strong bonds in a large group to share their work with only people who are relevant to them in a large group, but not with the whole company. So they were still preferring closed groups, and the numbers are really drastically different. So there was a very particular pattern for core users as well, preferring large closed groups. The two middle groups are a little less distinguishable, but these two extremes were really visibly leaning towards one type of community. So as a summary, I would say that compared to traditional online communities, we found that there's a new group of users which we labeled as promoters, who contribute rather than consume content. And when we look at things a little more qualitatively to understand their motivations, we found that the distinction is not in terms of numbers, not only in terms of stats, numbers, but also qualitatively we can distinguish them because super promoters, people that speak a lot, actually care only about themselves as opposed to having more of a community-oriented mind, promoting their teamwork. And so the idea here, one of the first advices we gave to the company was, it's great that a voluntary system is, heavily used in the workplace, but maybe we should be a little more careful about, or we should think about how to provide incentives to employees about consuming content rather than simply posting things. And how can we de-incentivize the promotional behaviors and avoid this new form of free ridership? Because free ridership, as you know, used to be called as if you just read stuff, it's free ridership. But here there is a new form of free ridership, as you see. People are there for reputation building, but not listening, which is definitely not good for innovation. And finally, as I said, core users prefer large closed groups. Super promoters prefer small open groups. How can we provide greater support for core and peripheral users to display legitimate community-oriented activities? Not only in closed groups, but also in open groups. We especially need the core users who care so much about innovation to be a little more visible in open spaces, and not only hide themselves within closed spaces. So I would like to give you time to ask questions, but I will very briefly talk about the second and the third project related to that. So with this project that has been published and finalized, we basically learned everything about the participation models, participation behaviors, but we care a lot more about the creativity part of it. How is this whole behavioral pattern leading to social network structure and different forms of creativity? And one quick answer, if I need to summarize everything in one sentence to you, I would say dramatic innovation always happens in closed spaces, not in open. So people who like to collaborate and get creative, we don't really know if it's happening because they are in closed spaces. We can't really know the causality. We are still working on it, but we know that closed spaces are a lot more a lot better for creativity and innovation. In one of the studies, we look at different network structures, which is bridging and bonding. So basically, bridging, I mean centrality of the group, versus bonding, which is network density, how close the group is. And we found that both open groups and closed groups can be creative, but when they have different network structures. For example, when a closed group is really creative when they are strongly bonded to one another, as opposed to an open group can be creative when they are bridged with the others in the company. So they can be both creative, which was a big paradox in the literature as well, because we actually had two streams of research, one arguing that no, you should be open, the other saying no, you should be closed, fighting with each other. And with this type of research, we found that you could actually do both. You just need different contexts to be creative, either through strong bonding internally or strong bridging externally. Either you are open or closed. So this is the further work, and for this kind of work, obviously, we use a lot of big data analytics and natural language processing, machine learning to analyze all that text available. So if you have any kind of interest in this kind of a data set or have the capability to do this kind of an analytical work to study this data set, I would definitely appreciate your input or collaboration in the future. Okay, hopefully this wasn't too much, but I still wanted to mention the second part. Thank you.
I think we have 10 minutes for Q&A.
Perfect.
When the promoters are sharing content, is it content they create themselves, or are they sharing others' content? Because that wouldn't be necessarily self-promoting. Is there a difference? Or is it all created by themselves?
Mostly themselves. Either most of them are blog posts. Actually, they have different sort of forms of contributions. They could upload a document, but most of them were actually blog posts within the community, because we look at groups in this situation. But yes, I mean, they could talk about their team, but it's still the piece of information that's written is by themselves. So it's yeah. Is that your question, or?
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering if the content was about only them, it was created by them, or they shared other work from others.
No, we didn't look at the external document. It's all their work.
In 2011, if I remember correctly, YouTube made an analysis of media activity of their users. So they revealed that about 89% of users just consume, just watch videos, about 10% comment, and about 1% those who post.
Yeah.
So we obviously have a pattern of pyramid of media activity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you evaluate in these terms, obviously, periphery users, core users, and promoters? What are these proportions? So how many just consume in person? How many comment or do some activities like sharing? And what percent are the heavy authors? So those who post something.
For this particular
for enterprise
research
social media
study, so are you asking anything different from this finding?
Yeah,
or
if we imagine this in the form of a pyramid. So how many people just consume? What is the share of consumers? What is the share of commenters or some kind of activities?
So
and how many post something?
yeah, so I think the numbers are not as dramatic. As you see, more than 50% of the overall users are promoters in this case, which is very, very different than the YouTube. It's a very, very large thing. So if you top it up with this 10%, which is super promoters or self-promoters, that makes more than 60% of the overall community that are there for posting. But I think the big distinction between this research and the YouTube research is many times in online communities, they only look at posting or viewing behavior separately. Here in this one, as a unique thing, we looked at both at the same time in our cluster analysis. So not only posting, but reading. So what makes the promoters a very different group of people is they post a lot, but they do not read. So we look at both behaviors at the same time in our cluster analysis. So in the YouTube research, for example, we don't really know whether this 1% which create content on YouTube are also watching content or not, because it doesn't matter as much, right?
Yeah.
But in this context, because it's an organizational setting, and the whole thing, the whole reason that the company launched this system is because employees can learn from each other, share, collaborate, and innovate something.
But intuitively, the vast majority of social media they just consume
Yes.
with a little to nothing activity in response, right? And the very small number, again, in terms of statistics,
Yes.
they post something.
Yes.
Do you think that these are indeed settings of enterprise social media, so very narrow and active group, which are very different from Facebook, Twitter, and so on?
That's what we think, exactly. I think one research is not sufficient to conclude such a dramatic finding, but that's what we found. Results are dramatically different from what we find in traditional online communities.
If everyone is promoters, who will read all this stuff?
Yes, exactly. And the company was really surprised with the results as well, because they were so proud of how much their system is being used. Although it's just voluntary, there were no incentives, no points, nothing was given, and the people, the employees were using it so extensively, so they were proud of system usage.
The graphomaniacs.
But yeah, they weren't, they were a bit shocked with this result. So there's a lot more to do really with this data set to understand what's going on.
Is there any indication of diversity of the groups? All kind of diversity. It can be gender, it can be
Yes,
tenure,
we
it
have
can
all
be
that data. We have a truly big data set, and we actually use it in the second and the third projects that we use, because the diversity of the group matters a lot when it comes to their creativity, right? And diversity could be many things, because they are geographically, separated. Some of them are collocated, but many of them are separated. In terms of their roles in the company, their seniority. So we identified all these diversity factors, and we actually look at that variable to determine their innovation score and creativity. And we know that it matters a lot. It matters differently in open versus closed groups. We also know that. But in this research, we really only wanted to understand how is this system being used? What is going on here? Because when we collected the data from the company, it was a very big data set, very complicated data set with all sorts of variables, and we had to start from somewhere. The best start was, let's see what's going on. Let's do some sort of an exploratory data analysis before going into more theory heavy work.
I just wanted to mention one term that you talked about, bridging. When you talk about
Yes.
bridging social capital, you talk about diversity.
Exactly.
This is the main issue.
Exactly, yes. We do use bridging and diversity in that research, both of them. Sure. Good question, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I was fascinated by your finding regarding the core user and their preference for closed group but
Right.
large group.
Yes.
But one of your recommendations, if I remember correctly, is that how does a company convince the core user to go into open groups?
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that might hurt the innovation? Because one of the reasons why those core users decide to go in a closed group is that they know the members and their capabilities within the group, which then foster that innovation.
Yes.
But by removing them and forcing them to go into and talk to everybody
Yes.
who might have different interests,
Yes.
actually that might hurt innovation for the company.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I
It's one of the
have
reasons why we
no.
have walls here. Originally, when we designed this lab,
Uh-huh.
they did not want walls. They want us to be part of the group as a whole,
Okay.
and I was like, no.
Oh,
I
really?
want, because I
Okay.
wanted a sense of community for
Yes.
the group of people that are in here.
Yeah. Yeah, so the rest of the project, I think anything else, any other research question that we will pose to utilize this data set would be to solve this dilemma, to look at the creativity concept and creativity aspect, and as I started my talk, how can we balance this I versus we space? You obviously need your private desk or room, but you also need to talk to others when the time comes. And in which situations, in what kind of context do you need to be private versus open? And that's a great question I have no easy answer to. The only thing is, we already know that more dramatic innovation is happening in closed spaces. Maybe because core users are preferring closed spaces. I mean, there are many reasons. Most of the time, the closed spaces have stronger bonds as well. So most likely, people who are already good at working with one another comes together to work on something. So there might be multiple reasons, but kind of a disadvantage for the company is if all valuable information is hidden in closed spaces in the long run, is it really a good thing or a bad thing? How can we balance this one? So we are not saying that core users should never use closed spaces, but should they also share some piece of information with the rest of the community in open spaces? But yeah, thank you. Great question.
Time for one more question. Maybe I'll ask. Were you able, aside of your interviews, were you able to map the formal roles within the organization and the activities? For example, whether core users might be also leaders and managers in the organizations and more invested in this part.
So we intuitively and our research census say a lot about this. We haven't formally studied that yet, but just going through the blog posts or conducting some quick analysis, for example, we know that admins, for example, they're always in open and large groups because they post things related to Christmas parties and things like that. So and leaders could be as part of some open groups to facilitate certain ideas, concepts within the company, or sometimes in the closed groups to lead a project. So, as I said, intuitively, and I think being engaged with this data set for so long, more than 5 years now, we do know the answers, but no formal study looking at that. But there is definitely some sort of a correlation, I would say, from my research perspective. Yes. Thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you everybody for being here, and we would like to thank you, Dr. Bogurchuk, for your talk. And this is a small something,
Thank
the
you
name
very
of the
much.
social
I
media
really
lab,
appreciate
and
that.
we hope to have you here again in the future.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.